A starving teacher walked 100 miles until a rich cowboy saved her life. August 1887, beneath the burning Arizona sun, a young teacher named Margaret O'Brien stumbled through the endless desert, her lips dry, her heart fading. When hope seemed lost, a lone rider appeared, James Big Jim Morrison, a quiet cowboy with eyes full of kindness. He lifted her from the dust, carried her to his ranch, and gave her food, shelter, and something she thought she'd never find again, a reason to live. In that vast, untamed land, a wounded soul met another, and together they built more than a home, they built hope. Sometimes the hardest journeys lead us exactly where we're meant to be, under the golden sky of the Wild West, where love rides in on the wind and kindness saves the lost. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city, where are you watching from tonight, and when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. August 1887. The Arizona desert burned like a sea of fire. Winds tore through crimson sand, carrying the heat of a dying sun. Beneath that merciless sky, a lone figure stumbled, Margaret Hayes, a young teacher from the east, clutching nothing but a tattered satchel and a fading dream that somewhere beyond the horizon, life still waited. Her shoes were torn, her dress frayed, her lips cracked and bleeding. Each breath scraped her throat raw. She had walked for miles, and now her body surrendered. Margaret fell to her knees for the third time, clutching her worn satchel, as though the books inside could still save her soul. The world dimmed. The wind screamed around her, cruel and endless. And then she heard it. Hoofbeats. A dark figure emerged through the storm of dust. A man on horseback, tall and steady, the brim of his hat, shadowing eyes the color of earth after rain. Colt Morrison, a cowboy born of wind and solitude, as untamed as the land itself. He reined in his horse, dropped to one knee beside her, and without a word, lifted her head gently. Water trickled from his canteen, drop by drop, onto her parched lips. It felt like fire meeting ice. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, meeting a face carved by sun, and years rough yet anchored by something rare, kindness. Her heart thudded against her chest as his voice broke the silence, low and steady like thunder far away. "Don't worry, ma'am. You're safe now." And in that moment, beneath the burning sun, two lost souls found each other, and the story of their destiny began. Part 1. The Stranger in Dust. The Arizona desert burned red beneath the afternoon sun. Winds rose from the dry earth, carrying fine dust and waves of heat that made every breath heavy. The sun hung low like a molten sphere of copper, pouring down a light that was both beautiful and cruel. Each gust cut through the ravines, howling like the cry of a land stripped bare of everything but loneliness. Colt Morrison tightened his reins, squinting into the distance. He'd been riding since dawn, tracing the red ridges in search of cattle scattered by last night's storm. His old horse Dusty snorted, tail flicking, hooves pressing into the scorching sand. Both man and horse were weary, but instinct kept Colt moving. Something in the wind stirred a restlessness in him, like the desert itself was whispering a secret he had yet to understand. And then he saw it, a shape. Far ahead on the slope of a dune, a faint patch of pale fabric moved against the wind. At first he thought it a mirage, one of the desert's cruel tricks when sunlight dances on the horizon. But Dusty neighed softly, and Colt knew it was real. He urged the horse forward. The shape grew clearer, a woman. Her dress, once beige, now bleached by the sun, clung to her body under a thin layer of dust. She lay on her side, brown hair tangled with sand, one hand clutching an old canvas bag, the other pressed deep into the earth as if holding on to life itself. Colt dismounted and knelt beside her. She was breathing shallow, uneven, but alive. Her skin burned hot beneath his calloused fingers. Without a thought, he pulled the canteen from his belt, lifted her head gently, and let a few drops of water touch her cracked lips. She flinched, a rough gasp escaping her throat. The water spilled down her neck, darkening the dust on her collar. Her lips trembled, dry and broken. Is someone there?" she whispered, voice raw and fragile. "Am I dreaming?" Colt's voice came low, steady as a wind after a storm. "No, you're alive. Drink." He poured another sip. She swallowed weakly, then opened her eyes, unfocused, trembling until her gaze met his. A rugged face, sun-worn eyes, deep and brown as old whiskey reflecting the crimson sky. For a heartbeat, she wasn't sure if she was seeing a man or a vision. Colt looked at her. Those eyes held a fatigue that ran deeper than the desert itself, the kind of weariness that only comes from wandering too long alone. He eased her upright, draping his leather coat around her shoulders. The smell of hide smoke and sun wrapped around her strangely comforting. "How long have you been walking?" he asked, eyes scanning the horizon. I don't know. Maybe 3 days. I came from the east. The train broke down. I tried to find the nearest town. Alone." She nodded weakly. "There's no one left out there. Only the desert." Colt said nothing. He was used to silence, the only language the West truly spoke. He turned to check Dusty's saddle, then looked back at her. "Can you stand?" "I don't think so." "Then I'll help." Before she could protest, he bent down, one arm beneath her shoulders, the other behind her knees, lifting her with a gentleness that surprised even him. She gasped, gripping his collar. His body radiated heat, the kind that felt alive, protective. He placed her on the horse, settling her so she leaned back against his chest. Climbing up behind her, he tugged on the reins and murmured, "Hold tight. It's a long ride." Her voice trembled, nearly lost to the wind. "I didn't think anyone still lived out here." The desert wind swept around them, raising clouds of red dust. Colt's coat flared behind him as he gave a faint, weary smile carved as if from stone. "I've been alone here for too long." The words hung in the dry air, not just for her, but for the desert, for himself, for all the years he'd lived without another heartbeat near his own. They rode on, slow and steady. Dusty's hooves thudded against the sand rhythm, matching the sigh of the wind. The sun dipped toward the west, pulling their twin shadows long across the glowing earth. Margaret sat silent in his arms, feeling the weight and warmth of his heartbeat sync with the rhythm of the horse. For the first time in days, she felt something other than fear or despair. She felt existence. She glanced up, his face stern, his gaze fixed on the fading horizon where the mountains glowed like embers. She wanted to ask his name, but the quiet between them felt sacred. After a while, his voice broke the stillness, low, steady. "A few more hours to my ranch. You'll be safe there." "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Colt Morrison." She managed a tired smile. "That sounds like a gunshot." He gave a faint chuckle. "Out here, guns listen better than people." The wind lifted strands of her hair across his shoulder. He tilted his head slightly to avoid them, but her scent dust sunlight, and something human made him still. How long had it been since someone had been this close? The sun finally sank. The desert turned the color of burnt copper. Light slipped away, leaving only warmth lingering in the air. Two silhouettes rode across the barren land, one man who had forgotten how to trust, and one woman who had just learned to live again. From that moment on, two lonely souls brushed against each other quietly, yet enough for the wind to still, for the sun to soften, as if the desert itself had paused to witness a change. In a place stripped of life, they found each other, and sometimes salvation begins with nothing more than a drop of water and a single look. Part 2. The Circle. M Ranch. The land of the lonely dusk had fallen by the time Colt and Margaret crossed the final ridge of red rock. Ahead, beneath the amber veil of sunset, the Circle M Ranch revealed itself a small patch of life amid an ocean of desert. A 2-story wooden house stood quietly by a line of gray willows. A thin column of smoke rose from the chimney into the violet sky. In the distance came faint sounds, cattle lowing, horses neighing, the echo of hammers striking fence posts. It wasn't much, but it lived. And in a world this barren, the mere sight of smoke and light was miracle enough. Margaret had long since drifted into sleep, her head resting lightly against Colt's chest, breath shallow but steady. He could feel her heartbeat, fragile beneath the thin fabric, a sound so small, yet it softened something in him he hadn't felt in years. Since losing his father and selling most of the herd, Colt Morrison had never brought another soul home to his ranch. At the wooden gate, his voice broke the silence roughened by dust and long miles. "Rosa, open up." From the porch, a middle-aged woman appeared. Rosa, the ranch's longtime housekeeper. Sturdy-build, gray-streaked hair tied in a knot apron still dusted with flour, a wooden spoon in her hand. Her eyes widened at the sight, her master on horseback cradling an unconscious woman. Lord above. Mr. Morrison, who's that? Someone I found out in the desert. Still breathing but barely. Bring her in. Hurry. Rosa rushed to open the door, her spoon clacking against the frame. Colt dismounted, lifted Margaret carefully as though she might shatter, and carried her inside. He laid her down on the couch near the hearth. Warm firelight danced along the log walls, mingling with the scent of pine smoke and half-baked bread. Rosa pulled the curtains shut, set a pot of water on the stove while Colt removed his coat, draping it over a chair before stepping closer. Under the flickering light, Margaret's face came into focus, pale, exhausted, yet striking in its quiet resilience. Not the sharp beauty of city women, but something gentler, the beauty of survival of a wildflower clinging to life in the wind. Take care of her, Colt murmured. Give her something light to eat when she wakes. He turned to leave, but Rosa frowned. You're not staying to keep watch. She could be trouble. Colt's lips curved faintly, a shadow of a smile. The desert's done enough harm to her already. He walked out, leaving behind the soft click of the closing door and the fading scent of smoke. Morning sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting long golden stripes across the floorboards. Margaret opened her eyes to a ceiling of pine wood and walls the color of old earth. Beside her bed stood a small table, a glass of water, a slice of brown bread. The air smelled of warmth, baked bread, coffee, a hint of wood smoke. She sat up slowly. Every muscle ached, but her chest rose and fell with life. For the first time in days, she wasn't hearing the roar of desert wind, but the quiet creak of a home. Rosa entered, carrying a basin of warm water and a towel. Well, now you're awake. The boss brought you here last night, didn't leave that window all night long. Drink a little. Margaret accepted the cup, voice hoarse. The boss? The man on horseback. Rosa nodded, a soft smile flickering beneath kind eyes. Colt Morrison. Been living out here alone for years. Margaret drank. The water cooled more than her throat. It sank into her chest, easing something inside her. She glanced around. The room was simple but tidy, cared for, like the man who'd rescued her. After Rosa left, the door opened again. Colt stood at the threshold, hat in hand. Morning light caught the lines of his face, rugged, sun-darkened, serious. His gaze was cool but searching, as though confirming she was real and not a fever dream. How are you feeling? Better. Thanks to you. He nodded toward the empty glass and the half-eaten bread. Rosa says you managed some food. That's good. You'll need a few days' rest, body's worn thin. I can have a spare cabin fixed up if you plan to stay a while. Margaret shook her head gently. You don't have to. Once I'm strong enough, I'll go. Colt turned to the window. Sunlight glinted off the wooden fence beyond. The desert's no place to walk alone. The words hung heavy in the air. For a long moment, only the faint rattle of wind against the shutters filled the silence. Margaret looked up, eyes tired but clear. Why did you save me? Colt didn't answer right away. The space between them filled with stillness, soft, fragile, human. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, but certain. Because no one deserves to die alone. The sentence struck like a bell in her chest, warm and sharp at once. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charm. It was truth. Their eyes met, not out of fear, not out of gratitude, but out of understanding. From the hallway, Rosa peeked through a crack in the door. She smiled quietly to herself and whispered, Been a long time since Circle M felt like it had a heartbeat. By evening, smoke once again rose from the chimney, curling into the twilight. Colt stood by the stables, tightening a saddle strap, but his eyes drifted back toward the small window, where a woman now sat awake, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Inside, Margaret still heard his voice echoing in her mind. No one deserves to die alone. And as the desert wind swept through the valley, she understood her journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. Part 3. The Firelight Promise night fell over. Circle M Ranch, slow and heavy like a dark blanket spreading across the desert. Winds from the west swept over the porch, whispering through the boards, carrying the scent of dust and sand. Inside the fire in the hearth, flickered and cracked painting streaks of crimson light across the wooden walls, red like blood fading into shadow. Margaret Hayes sat curled in a worn armchair, her hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea Rosa had brought. The firelight danced in her eyes that had once been filled with panic in the sandstorm, now calm, almost peaceful. Across from her, Colt Morrison leaned back in a leather chair, his cowboy hat resting on his knee, a glass of bourbon glinting amber in his hand. The space between them was only a few paces, yet silent, vast, like another desert of its own. Margaret spoke first, her voice soft and hoarse. "Thank you for saving me. If it weren't for you, I'd still be out there, or worse." Colt didn't answer immediately. He lifted his glass. The firelight caught in his eyes. The desert doesn't choose who it spares. You just got lucky. Margaret gave a tired smile. Maybe. But sometimes luck is just a hard lesson dressed up as survival. He looked up at her, really looked. The woman he'd pulled from the dust wasn't fragile at all. There was steel in her gaze, the quiet kind born of loss. "Where did you come from?" he asked. Margaret inhaled, staring into the fire as if speaking to it. "From the east. I used to be a teacher, in Boston. When my parents died of sickness, all I had left was my teaching certificate. I heard new towns in the west needed teachers, so I sold everything. Took the train and walked the rest. Nearly 100 miles. Colt said nothing, only listened. The wind hummed outside. The fire popped softly in the silence. At first, she continued, voice trembling, "I thought I was brave. I thought this was the journey of a free woman. But the desert taught me something else, that between freedom and despair, there's only one breath." She paused, clutching the cup tighter. "All I wanted was to teach. I didn't expect to have to learn how to survive." A gust of wind struck the door, rattling it. The fire wavered, throwing her face into half light, half shadow. For an instant, Colt saw both halves of her, the gentle schoolteacher from the city and the soul that had just crawled out of hell. He set his glass down, his voice deep and low. "Out here surviving is the first lesson." The words rolled through the room like distant thunder, quiet but heavy. Margaret looked up. Their eyes met across the fire. There was something in his voice, not just experience, but pain buried beneath calm. "And you?" she asked softly. "When did you learn that lesson?" Colt was silent for a long time. The firelight traced the hard lines of his face. Finally he said, "When I was 16, my father drank himself to death. My mother froze that first winter in Texas. After that, I rode off, worked cattle, carried guns, learned not to need anyone. Since then, surviving's the only thing I've been good at." His words hung in the room, glowing faint like embers, not burning, but leaving smoke inside her heart. Margaret set her cup down, eyes following the sparks rising into the chimney. "You speak of survival, like it's a goal, not a burden." Colt's lips curved slightly, a half smile tinged with sorrow. "Out here, people don't have time to tell the difference." Silence again, but this time softer, shared. Outside, the cold seeped in through the cracks, yet the fire kept them warm, wrapping both their worlds, intellect and instinct, in the same light. Between them lay a rare thing, understanding. Margaret whispered almost to herself, "Maybe out here I need to learn more than survival. Maybe how to truly exist." Colt rose, took a blanket from the chair, and gently draped it over her shoulders. "Tomorrow's sun will be hotter than today," he said. "Steady but kind. Get some rest. You'll need strength to start again." Margaret looked up at him. The fire cast his eyes in a deep amber glow, eyes that made her want to believe, though she barely knew him a day. "Colt," she murmured, "where will you go?" "The stables. Easier to sleep out there." "Why?" "Because that's where I can still hear the truth of the night." She smiled faintly, tired but sincere. "Thank you for teaching me my first lesson." He paused at the doorway, didn't turn back. Between fire and wind, you learn to keep your heart warm. The door closed behind him, leaving only the sound of the fire and her heartbeat slow and steady. That night, Margaret didn't sleep. She watched the flames sink into embers, feeling something shift inside, a strange comfort, as if her loneliness wasn't alone anymore. In the harshest corner of the world, she had found someone who understood that life wasn't just survival, it was holding on to humanity in the dust. And as the last flicker of firelight danced across the wooden walls, she heard faintly from somewhere beyond the window the soft whinny of a horse and the low voice of the cowboy in the dark. Out here surviving is the first lesson. It wasn't just a line, it was a promise. Part 4. The Hands Who Can't Read. Afternoon sunlight drenched Circle M Ranch in a dry, golden haze. The grasslands stretched out toward the horizon, brittle, sunburned, alive with heat. The air smelled of sweat horses and dust. From the cattle pens came the sound of laughter hammering and the rough, joking curses of cowboys' harsh voices that somehow carried warmth. Colt Morrison stepped out of the main house, his Stetson low over his brow, his stride sure and grounded. Behind him walked Margaret Hayes, her arms full of small chalkboards and a cloth bag of white chalk. A group of ranch hands sat scattered around an old wooden table, curiosity flickering in their sunburned faces. "All right, fellas." Colt began, his voice deep and steady, the kind that carried like an order. "From now on, after work, anyone who wants to can stay and learn to read and write. Miss Hayes here will be your teacher. Not required, but anyone who tries gets an extra $50 a month." The men exchanged looks, then a burst of laughter broke out. "Teaching us letters, boss. Hell, a cow's smarter than me." "Shut it, Hank," another said, grinning. "Maybe I'll finally write home to my wife." "Ha, you write a letter. I'll bet it rains in the desert." Margaret only smiled. She set the chalkboards on the table, brushed off the dust, and spoke softly but firmly. "Letters don't choose people. They just wait for someone brave enough to begin." The noise died. For a moment, even the wind seemed to pause. Colt looked at her, something unreadable passing in his eyes. Admiration, maybe, or the rare feeling of hope in a place that had forgotten it. She stood in the yard, hair tousled by the wind, her dress dusted gold by sunlight and sand. Her eyes were bright, alive. From where he stood, Colt felt a stillness stir inside him, the kind that felt dangerously close to peace. That evening, 5 men sat around the table, rough, sun-hardened cowboys with rope-burned hands and skin the color of leather. They stared at the pieces of chalk like they were weapons from another world. Margaret smiled, placing her hand gently on the board. "We'll start simple with your names." One scratched his head. "I'm Earl, ma'am, but I ain't never written it before." "Then today's your first time," she said, handing him the chalk. Earl held it stiffly as if gripping a pistol. He pressed it to the board, scrawling unevenly, ERL. Margaret smiled, missing an A. But that's all right. The first letter's always the hardest. Earl blinked, then laughed, a rough, disbelieving laugh. "Look at that, boys, I just wrote my own damn name." The others broke into laughter too, not mocking, but bright freeing. "Let me try me too." And soon each man took a turn. Calloused fingers trembling, drawing shaky white marks that gleamed under the sun. The air filled with the sound of chalk scratching and laughter echoing, strange, clumsy human. Margaret's voice guided them patiently, gently correcting strokes and sounds. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying with it a rhythm, chalk against wood, wind against sky, like the heartbeat of something new being born. Colt stood leaning on the fence, arms crossed, watching. His coat flapped lightly in the wind. He didn't speak, but his eyes held something rare pride and the quiet ache of a man seeing hope take shape before him. Margaret bent to help Earl correct a letter, her fingers brushing his for a moment. The group went silent. They watched, not out of jealousy, but reverence, as if that simple touch meant something sacred. Then the youngest cowboy, Tommy, lifted his hand. His voice trembled. "Miss Hayes? Can I write a different name?" "Of course, Tommy. Whose name?" "My little girl. Her name's Lila." He took the chalk hand, shaking, and slowly, painfully wrote it Lila. Then he looked up, voice breaking. "I just wrote my daughter's name." No one laughed. No one spoke. Only the wind moved a low hum through the dry grass, the faint whisper of the desert holding its breath. Margaret covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't sadness, it was the kind of joy too deep for words. Colt gripped the fence tighter, jaw set. The light in her eyes caught the dying sunfire, and gold reflected in her tears. He inhaled slowly, the air burning with something he hadn't felt in years. He stepped forward, his voice calm but resonant. "What you did today, that's something most men never do. You began." The men lifted their heads. Gone were the rough, careless looks of cowboys. In their place were the faces of men standing taller, meeting their own futures with open eyes. Margaret wiped her tears, smiling softly. "Tomorrow we'll learn sentences. But tonight remember this, words may be small, but they help a man stand taller." A whistle cut the air, then a clap, then another. And soon the whole yard erupted in applause, laughter, and shouts, raw, unpolished, but alive. Colt stood apart, silent still, but his eyes burned with pride. The setting sun traced the edges of his face in bronze, turning his stillness into something heroic. He didn't need to speak. The smallest nod toward Margaret said everything, "Thank you." That night, when the sun had set behind the ridges, Margaret sat by the window, writing in her journal under the oil lamp's glow. Today, a man wrote his daughter's name, and I realized teaching letters isn't just sharing knowledge. It's saving souls. She closed the book, gazing out the window. Colt was still outside, giving the horses water, his shadow long against the red earth. A faint smile touched her lips. For the first time in years, something flickered inside her chest. Faith. Part 5. The Desert Storm. Evening in the Arizona desert carried a strange heaviness that day. The air was dry, the wind harsher than usual, laced with the smell of dust and scorched earth. Far on the horizon, the sky blurred into a dull, molten bronze. Colt Morrison narrowed his eyes, unease stirring in his gut. "Storm's comin'," he muttered, voice rough, reins pulled tight. "We need to head back." But Margaret Hayes stood firm in the open field, her dress whipping around her legs, notebook clutched to her chest. She was inspecting the small wooden frame of the makeshift school they'd built for the ranch children, the first school of Cedar Springs. "Just a few more minutes," she called back, her voice snatched by the wind. "I need to check the roof. If it rains tonight, it could collapse." Colt strode toward her, jaw set. "Out here, there ain't such a thing as a few more minutes, Margaret. Look," he pointed westward. A massive wall of dust was rising, swirling, roaring alive like a beast made of sand. The sky darkened. The golden light vanished in an instant. The horses in the corral screamed and stamped in panic. Margaret turned and for the first time saw the desert's fury. The wind shrieked, hurling sand like shards of glass. The world turned red and violent. Colt lunged forward, grabbed her hand. "Move now." They ran heads down, half blind, the storm closing in. Sand clawed at their skin, filling their mouths, their eyes. Everything became noise and chaos and pain. Margaret stumbled. Colt caught her, pulling her into his chest, shielding her with his body. There, he shouted above the roar. "The rocks go!" Half dragging, half guiding her, he pushed through the wind. His grip never loosened. The storm howled like an angry god, but they pressed on until at last a shadow appeared, a narrow crack between stone. Colt shoved Margaret inside first, then followed, sealing them both in darkness. Outside, the desert screamed. The cave shook with every gust. Sand battered the walls in a relentless hiss. They collapsed against the cold rock, gasping for air. Margaret coughed, hands trembling as she brushed the grit from her hair and face. Colt peered through the dark, his voice low but steady. "You hurt?" "No," she panted, "but my heart's about to give out." He gave a short, quiet laugh, his breath mixing with the storm's growl. "If you're scared, that means you're still alive." She pressed her lips together, glancing toward the mouth of the cave, where flashes of lightning split the sky. For a heartbeat, the flare lit his face, dusty, hard-edged, yet impossibly calm. "Aren't you afraid?" she whispered. He looked into the storm eyes, steady. "I used to be, but now I'm more afraid of losing someone. Out here." Her breath caught. Their shoulders brushed in the narrow space. Each time the wind roared, the walls trembled, and instinctively she leaned closer, drawn to the only warmth that felt real. Outside, the desert raged. Inside, silence broken only by the sound of their hearts. Another violent gust hit. Fine sand swirled in stinging her throat. Colt moved instantly, wrapping his arm around her waist, pulling her against him, shielding her completely. His voice was deep, close to her ear. "If you stay close," he said, his breath warm, "you'll live." Margaret trembled. She could feel his heat, smell the dust and leather, the raw scent of a man who belonged to the wild. She looked up, and their eyes met, steady, dark, and alive. Then, she whispered, voice shaking, "I'll stay close forever." The world seemed to stop. Outside, the desert screamed. Inside, time stood still. Colt didn't speak, just held her tighter. The storm's fury faded to a heartbeat. Theirs entwined, slow and strong. She rested her forehead against his chest, listening. His pulse was the rhythm of hooves against dry earth, steady, grounding, alive. In the chaos of nature, she had found her peace. Minutes passed, or hours. The storm began to fade, the howling softening into distant moans. The sand settled. The desert began to breathe again. Margaret lifted her head, eyes glinting faintly in the dark. "Colt, thank you." He exhaled, voice rough but gentle. "Told you Miss Hayes out here staying alive means knowing when to hold on to someone." She smiled through the dust, a trembling but radiant smile. "And when to trust." Colt looked at her. Really looked and turned away slightly. His voice, a whisper. "Trust. That's the hardest lesson." They sat together, unmoving, bound by the quiet hum of shared breath. Two small sparks of humanity in a world that had none. When the storm finally died, Colt rose, brushing the dust from his coat. He held out his hand. "Come on. Ranch ain't far. Storm's past." Margaret placed her hand in his. It was rough, calloused, and warm. She stood, meeting his gaze. No words, just understanding. They stepped out into the aftermath, sunlight breaking through the thinning clouds, painting the wet sand in streaks of gold. Far ahead, the road to the ranch shimmered under the new light. And somewhere between the wind and the earth, Colt's words lingered. "If you stay close, you'll live." Margaret whispered softly, her promise carried by the breeze. "Then I'll stay close forever." Part 6. The letter that never came that morning, Circle M. Ranch felt quieter than usual. The first light of day slipped through a veil of mist, turning the dry grass fields into shades of honey. From afar came the distant crow of a rooster, the snort of a horse in the stable, and the sigh of wind weaving through the fence, the gentle rhythm of the wild after the storm. Margaret Hayes sat on the porch, a cup of cold tea in her hands. Dust still clung to the hem of her dress, her hair tied neatly, but her eyes were heavy. Since dawn, she had been holding a letter sealed in Boston, the city she once called home, the place she had written to months ago asking for a teaching position. The envelope was thin, pale yellow with a faint trace of road dust. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Only a few lines short, formal, merciless. "Dear Miss Hayes, we have chosen another candidate for the teaching position at Eastbrook Academy. We wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors." No signature, no warmth, nothing more. She read it again and again until the words blurred beneath her tears. Months of hope, of longing to teach again, to return to a world of books and classrooms and civility gone in an instant. She had thought the West was only a stop along the way, but now the door to her old life had closed forever. The wind lifted a few strands of her hair as she folded the letter and tucked it into her notebook. Before her stretched the vast golden plains, and in the distance Colt Morrison led a horse past the willow trees. His stride was steady, familiar, but from afar, he looked like a man who had long made peace with staying behind. Margaret's eyes stung. She pressed the letter flat on her lap and said nothing. Moments later, she heard slow, firm footsteps. Colt appeared on the porch, his shadow stretching across the dusty ground. He stood there for a moment before speaking, his voice low. "Rosa said, 'You got a letter.'" Margaret didn't look up. Her voice was hoarse. "Yes, from Boston. The school I wanted. They hired someone else." Colt didn't respond right away. He stepped closer, gloves still in hand, the morning light glinting on his dark hair. His gaze fell on the letter resting on her knees, its creased edges trembling in the wind. "You're disappointed?" "No. It just feels like losing something I never truly had." "Your old world?" "Yes. I thought I'd go back someday to teach to live quietly among cobblestone streets and polite people. But here?" She paused, eyes lost on the horizon. Everything is too real, too harsh. Colt sat down beside her on the wooden steps. He didn't speak for a while. Then his voice came slow and deliberate, each word weighed like truth. "Maybe you were meant to teach here, not there." Margaret turned to him, startled. His words didn't sound like comfort, they sounded like conviction. He went on, eyes still fixed on the fields ahead. "Out here, folks never had anyone teach them much except how to survive. But you remind me there's still things worth believing in." She stared at him, her breath caught. The wind carried the scent of hay and smoke, the soft hum of morning life. And in that still moment, she looked at Colt, truly looked. His sun-browned face, the hard edges carved by years of silence and solitude. Yet in his eyes today, she saw something new, warmth, fragile but real, like a small flame flickering against the cold. A faint smile touched her lips, though tears still lingered. "And what do you think I could possibly teach people here, Colt?" He turned toward her, his gaze steady, deep enough to make her heart falter. "That they deserve a new beginning. Same as you." Margaret looked down, fingers twisting together. The silence between them was gentle, not heavy, not distant, simply enough. A gust of wind swept past, lifting the letter from her lap. Colt caught it before it blew away, folded it carefully, and placed it back in her hands. "Keep it," he said quietly. "To remember if they didn't take you there, it's 'cause somewhere else already needed you." She clutched the letter but didn't lift her eyes. Her voice trembled. "Colt, do you ever think some people are just born in the wrong place, the wrong time?" He was silent for a long while. Then he said softly, "No. I think everyone ends up where they're meant to. Some roads just take a little longer." Their eyes met, and for the first time Margaret saw something in his that went beyond strength and solitude. She saw destiny, a quiet certainty that she wasn't lost anymore, that maybe she had simply arrived. Colt stood, placing his hat back on. The light caught under its brim, half shadowing his face. "You'll be all right, teacher. And you, I'll be right here, like always." He walked away, his silhouette stretching long across the sunlit ground. Margaret sat still, the letter clutched in her hands, but it no longer felt like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something else. She opened her notebook and wrote, her handwriting trembling but sure. Some letters never arrive because fate already knows where we belong. The sunlight spilled onto the page, soft and warm. And when she looked up again, Colt was already far across the field, but her eyes followed him, knowing that somehow a part of her heart had begun to walk beside him through the golden desert that was now her home. Part 7. The School at Cedar Springs. Morning light poured over Cedar Springs like liquid honey. The breeze carried the scent of water from the narrow stream winding through the stones, softening the dryness of the land. Across the field, a few men hammered wooden posts into the ground, the steady rhythm of hammers echoing like the heartbeat of a land learning to live again. Margaret Hayes stood in the middle of the clearing, her beige dress simple but neat, a rolled-up sketch of rough drawings clutched in her hand, the plan for their first schoolhouse. Beside her, Colt Morrison fixed the final plank into the frame, driving a nail through the wood with practiced precision. The sunlight caught on his sweat-dampened skin, turning his hair the color of burnished copper. "Never thought a teacher from Boston would turn my ranch into a school," Colt said, half teasing, half sincere. Margaret smiled faintly, her voice like the morning breeze. "And I never thought a cowboy from the West would help me build one." "I just put up the walls," he replied. "You're the one giving it a soul." Their eyes met for a quiet moment before the sound of hammering filled the silence again, the music of beginnings. 3 days later, the school stood complete. A humble wooden cabin with a patched tin roof, a blackboard made from an old door painted over desks cobbled together from whiskey crates. But to Margaret, it was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. That morning, children from nearby ranches gathered outside, small faces smudged with dust eyes, bright with curiosity. Some were barefoot, others clutched torn notebooks or scraps of paper. They lined up shyly, giggling at the sight of the soft-voiced woman with brown hair and kind eyes. Margaret placed her hand on the rough surface of the blackboard. The coarse texture beneath her fingers made her heart tremble. Years of dreaming condensed into that single touch. She turned toward the children, her voice gentle but firm. "Let's begin. Today we'll learn our first letter, the letter A." She drew one straight line, then two slanted ones, chalk, squeaking softly. "This is A," she said. "A like apple, like air, like a new beginning." Her words carried into the open sky, blending with the murmur of the stream and the whisper of wind. Then the children repeated after her loud, eager, "A." The sound rang out clear as silver bells spilling over the fields, soaring into the blue. Margaret froze for a moment, overcome. She had never heard anything so pure, so alive. Through the window she saw Colt leaning against a wooden post, hands in his pockets, watching. The sunlight slanted across his face, usually hard, now softened by something unspoken. Pride, perhaps. Or peace. She smiled. Their eyes met, and in that glance she knew he was proud of her, and maybe proud of this land too. The class went on. Small, rough hands clutched pieces of chalk, tracing shaky, uneven letters. Margaret moved among them, guiding, correcting, encouraging. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her eyes glowed bright with love and belief. Outside, Colt remained by the doorway, silent. Each laugh, each letter, each shout of joy struck something inside him, something he'd long forgotten how to feel. He had never imagined his barren ranch could echo with the sound of children's laughter. From the kitchen, Rosa stepped out, standing beside him with a knowing smile. "First time I've seen you smile, boss." "I did?" he asked, surprised. "A real one," she said, "not the kind that fades quick." Colt looked back toward the classroom. Margaret was bending over a little boy's desk, her hair falling loose in the sunlight. For a moment, the entire room seemed to glow. He exhaled slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe she's the reason I still believe this place can be good." By midday, the lesson ended. The children burst out of the classroom, chasing one another, toward the stream, their laughter scattering like songbirds. Margaret stood by the door, watching them, her heart swelling with quiet joy. Colt approached. "You look happy," he said. "Happier than I ever was in Boston." "Why?" "Because here I can see what my hands have built. Every letter, every bead of sweat means something. In Boston, everything came too easy. But here, every word is a victory." Colt nodded. "A victory of faith." Margaret smiled softly. "And of courage." A gust of wind swept through, carrying specks of chalk dust into the sunlight. The tiny white particles shimmered in the air like snow. Colt lifted his hand, catching a few in his palm, his eyes following their slow drift away. "Maybe," he murmured, "this is why you came here." Margaret met his gaze, eyes bright. "And maybe you were meant to remind others there's still something good worth believing in." They stood in silence, the wind and the stream whispering between them, the laughter of children echoing across the valley. Colt turned away at last, his voice low. "Cedar Springs. It finally feels alive." Margaret watched him walk off toward the sunlight, her chest tight with something she couldn't name, gentle yet fierce, like a flower blooming in the dust. Above them, the sky stretched endless and blue. The laughter of children lingered on the breeze, and in the land once ruled by wind and silence, hope had begun to bloom. Part 8. The ride through the night in Cedar Springs was still as paper, the silence broken only by the hum of insects rising from the faraway fields. A thin moon hung low, pale as steel. Margaret was tidying up the small schoolhouse when the thunder of hooves shattered the quiet. The door flew open. Miguel, one of the ranch hands, burst in breathless. "Mr. Colt, something's happened. The Patterson boy's been kicked in the head by a horse. Miss Sarah says to fetch Miss Hayes. The boy trusts her." From the shadows, Colt Morrison stepped forward, hat brim low. He didn't waste a second, tossed aside the half-lit cigarette, swung up onto his horse in a single practiced motion. "Get the torches ready," he barked. Margaret ran from the doorway, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. "I'm coming with you." Colt turned, eyes hard, but glinting with worry. "It's 40 miles in the dark. You don't have to. The boy needs someone he trusts," she said simply. "I'm his teacher." There was no argument left. Colt held her gaze for a breath, then nodded. "All right, mount up." The night wind tore at them as their horses raced through the plains, the torchlight flaring wildly, casting gold and shadow across the riders' faces. Margaret clung to Colt's back, her heart hammering. The air was cold enough to sting the ground a blur beneath them. "Hold on, teacher," Colt shouted over the wind. "We ride till dawn." She nodded, tears swept away by the rush of air. She had never been so afraid and never trusted anyone more. They rode through darkness thick as ink. The torches lit flashes of rock cactus and open desert, an endless sea of silence and danger. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Colt didn't slow. His jaw was set the hard line of a man who'd faced death before, but tonight, something in him burned differently. He wasn't just fighting for a boy, he was fighting for her. Near midnight, they reached the Patterson homestead, a single wooden house glowing faintly under a wavering lantern. Sarah Patterson ran out, face pale, voice breaking. "Thank the Lord you're here. He ain't woken up since the horse kicked him. I'm so scared." Margaret darted inside. Billy lay still on the bed, his forehead swollen, breathing shallow. Margaret knelt beside him, trembling but steady. "Colt, I need water and clean cloths." Colt ran for the well, came back with a bucket. The torchlight threw their shadows tall and sharp across the wall, two figures wrestling against the edge of life and death. Margaret wiped the blood, whispering to Sarah, "Don't move him. Keep his head still." Billy whimpered, barely audible. Margaret's eyes filled, but her hands did not falter. Time passed like slow sand. Outside, the wind whistled through the slats. Inside, the only sounds were the child's labored breaths and the faint tremor of Margaret's whispering prayers. "Will he make it?" Sarah asked, voice trembling. "He's strong," Margaret said, though she wasn't sure. "He just needs till morning." Colt laid a hand on her shoulder, firm, grounding. "You're not alone in this." When dawn finally broke, the first streaks of light spilled through the cracked window. Billy's eyes fluttered open. "Miss Hayes," he whispered. Margaret froze, then burst into tears. "Billy. Oh, Billy, you're awake." Sarah let out a sob and threw her arms around her son. Colt stood behind them, silent head bowed in relief. The house filled with quiet, the kind of silence that comes only after fear has passed. Margaret sank to the floor, the damp cloth still in her hand. Every ounce of strength had left her. Colt stepped forward, gently helping her to her feet. "You saved him," he said softly. "And you saved me." She looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" Colt hesitated, then placed a calloused hand against her cheek. His touch was rough, warm, real. "It's been a long time since I believed in anything. You reminded me what that feels like." For a heartbeat, everything stopped, wind light, even breath. The sunrise poured through the window, washing them both in gold. Margaret couldn't speak. Colt drew her closer, and for the first time he held her. No promises, no words, just the quiet truth of two lonely souls finding warmth in the same storm. Her face rested against his chest, listening to his heart, strong, steady, the rhythm of hooves pounding through the night. When the sun climbed higher, Colt led the horses out front. Margaret followed, cloak in hand. "You're not resting, not till I know the boy's safe." "You same." They exchanged weary smiles, soft knowing. Colt tipped his hat, his voice low and rough. "Hold on, teacher. We made it till dawn." Margaret met his eyes, her voice trembling, but sure. "And I never want this dawn to end." The morning light spilled over them, turning their shadows into one. The long night was behind them, and with it, something new had begun. Part 9. The Confession Under the Stars. That night, the sky over Cedar Springs was a sheet of black silk scattered with silver stars. Not a breath of wind stirred, only the murmur of the stream, and the scent of dry grass drifting through the cool air. After the long night of saving a child's life, the ranch had fallen asleep, all but for a small fire flickering by the creekside. Colt Morrison sat beside the flames, his hat resting on his knee. The light danced across his face, half in glow, half in shadow, carving every line of solitude time had etched upon him. Across from him, Margaret Hayes sat wrapped in a wool blanket, her hair, unbound eyes lost somewhere between the fire and the stars. Between them was silence, not awkward, not distant, but full of everything that didn't need to be said. The fire crackled softly, sending up sparks that died like falling stars. In the distance, a lone owl called into the dark. Margaret turned slightly, her voice as gentle as the night air. "You're not sleeping." Colt shook his head. "Don't know how. Because of the night's ride, because I'm not ready to rest." She studied him quietly. The firelight caught in his dark eyes, and for the first time she saw something deeper there, sorrow and a strange kind of peace that came from surviving too much. "Colt," she began softly, "you've saved me. More than once." He looked over at her. "You mean the night I found you in the desert?" Not just that, she said, her gaze fixed on the fire. "Every day since. When I thought I didn't belong anywhere. You made me believe there's a place for me here." Colt said nothing. Her voice trembled as she continued, almost afraid her words would vanish into the wind. "At first I thought you were cold, distant. But then I realized sometimes the quietest ones feel the most." A spark leapt from the fire, landing on the sand before dying out. Colt lowered his head, his voice deep, slow. "You know, Margaret, I've lived too long between wind and dust. Out here, trusting the wrong person can get you killed. So folks just stop trusting at all. But you trusted me," she whispered. He lifted his gaze. Their eyes met, and her heartbeat stumbled. "It wasn't a choice," he said. "I just couldn't not trust you." Margaret drew a sharp breath. Those words, simple as they were, felt truer than any declaration of love she'd ever known. The firelight painted her face with warmth, her lips trembling faintly. "You don't know how much you've changed me," she murmured. Colt's lips curved in a quiet, wistful smile. His voice was soft, but it carried like wind across open land. "You saved me first." She looked up, startled. "Me, I was just a lost teacher." He shook his head, his gaze steady, tender. "Before you came, this ranch was just dirt and fences. I only kept it alive because I didn't know what else to do. Then you brought laughter, hope, life. I'd forgotten what warmth felt like until you." A cool breeze whispered by, carrying the scent of hay and river water. She shivered, not from the cold, but from the strange closeness that wrapped around them. "You're scaring me, Colt," she said softly. "Why? Because I'm afraid. I won't be able to leave anymore." He turned to her, his eyes glowing with reflected firelight. "Then don't." She let out a shaky laugh, tears glimmering. "You make it sound so easy." "Because I've been thinking about it every night since I met you." The world went quiet again. Only the sound of water, of wind, of two hearts finding the same rhythm. Colt reached out. His hand, large, rough, scarred, hovered for a moment before she placed her own within it. Her fingers were small, warm, trembling. His grip tightened slowly, carefully, like someone learning not to be afraid of holding on. Then he leaned closer, his voice low, breaking with something raw and real. "You saved me first," he whispered again. Margaret closed her eyes as his breath brushed her cheek, and then his lips found hers. The kiss was not urgent. It was slow, deep, honest. The quiet melting of two souls who had walked too long in loneliness. It carried the taste of dust and fire and something eternal, like the desert wind, fierce, dry, but filled with life. Margaret trembled, clutching his shirt, not out of fear, but because she couldn't bear to let go. Colt's arm circled her, drawing her close, while above them the stars burned brighter, their light scattering across her hair like silver dust. When they finally parted, silence returned, the soft, sacred kind that comes when everything true has already been spoken. Colt brushed a strand of hair from her face, his voice low, rough-edged. I used to think I was born to live alone." She rested her head against his shoulder. "And I used to think I was born to keep searching for somewhere to belong." He smiled faintly. "Looks like we were both wrong." Above them, the stars shimmered endless eternal. The stream whispered its gentle song, carrying the scent of grass and night. Margaret lifted her eyes to the sky. "If someone asked me what love looks like," she said softly, "I'd tell them about this night." Colt tightened his hand around hers, his gaze still on the stars. "And I'd say, it looks like your light in a world I thought was all darkness." She smiled through her tears, eyes glinting like falling stars. In the wild silence of the western night, where words were rare and hearts even rarer, two lonely souls had found each other not in promises but in quiet truth. The fire burned low, its last sparks fading into the sand. The final glow brushed their faces and the night closed around them with one more kiss, soft, still, eternal. Part 10. The Desert's Promise. Dawn spread slowly over Cedar Springs, painting the wild land in shades of amber and gold. After months of labor, the first school of the West stood complete, its wooden walls glowing in the morning sun, the tin roof old but sturdy, a small flag swaying gently in the cool breeze. Margaret Hayes stood on the porch, her pale blue dress fluttering in the wind. Paint still stained her hands, but her eyes were clear, shimmering with quiet pride. Every wound, every fear seemed to have melted away with the passing night. From the stables, Colt Morrison approached, tall, calm, his white shirt, carrying the scent of leather and dust. He led a black horse beside him, walking slowly as sunlight traced a halo around his sun-browned face. Margaret smiled. "You look different today." Colt shrugged. "Maybe because today matters." "The first day of school," she teased. "The first day." "Of the rest," he replied, voice low and gentle, stopping in front of her. The wind brushed past, tossing a few strands of her hair across her cheek. Colt's eyes softened. In them was something the desert rarely held peace. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small object, a ring rough and simple forged from an old piece of his saddle iron. Smoothed and polished, it caught the sun like a drop of dew upon sand. Margaret gasped softly, her hand rising to her lips. Colt took her hand, his voice husky, honest, so much that even the wind seemed to hush. "I have no gold, no silver. Only this piece of iron. It's ridden through storms and sleepless nights with me. And now I want it to ride with you." He knelt on one knee, sunlight gliding along his back. The wind carried the scent of hay, earth, and freedom, the essence of the land that had tested them, shaped them, and finally bound them together. "Margaret Hayes," he said slowly, firmly, "you've turned this desert into a home. If you stay, I promise I'll make it bloom." Tears welled in her eyes as she laughed softly through the tremble. "Colt, did you just propose to me with a saddle ring?" He smiled, the first true smile of a man who had once known only solitude. "That saddle carried me through hell. Now I want it to take me to heaven if you'll come along." She wept, not from sorrow, but from the sudden knowing that every wrong turn, every storm, every tear had led her here. Margaret nodded, whispering, "Yes, Colt. 1,000 times yes." He rose and slid the ring onto her finger. The cold iron touched her skin, then warmed under the morning sun. Colt leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead, a tender promise that everything would be all right. From afar came the laughter of children. The first students of Cedar Springs ran toward the school's small chalkboards in hand feet, pattering on the sand. Margaret wiped her tears quickly and fixed her hair. Colt chuckled. A bride-to-be and still the teacher first. She whispered, "That's why I love this place." Inside the classroom, light poured through the window, glinting off the freshly painted blackboard. The smell of new wood chalk and morning air mingled like the beginning of a song. With a steady hand, she wrote the words, "Love always finds a way, even in the desert." The children repeated after her, their voices bright and pure, echoing across the dry land, breathing life into a place once ruled by silence and sand. Colt stood by the door, his eyes filled with something beyond words. A single beam of sunlight struck the iron ring on Margaret's hand. It glowed simple and enduring, like the land itself. When the day's lessons ended, Margaret stepped outside. The afternoon sun draped her shoulders in gold. She turned to look at the little school, their shared creation now alive with laughter. Colt came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her. "See," he murmured. "Cedar Springs has bloomed." She leaned into him, gazing at the horizon where the red desert stretched endlessly. "And we'll stay," she said softly but sure, "to keep it blooming." He kissed her hair. "Forever." She smiled. "Forever." Far off, the sun sank behind the hills, spilling gold over the red earth and the glimmering stream. The flag on the schoolhouse fluttered in the fading wind, mingling with the sounds of horses and children's laughter, a quiet symphony of new life. In this once barren land, where there had only been wind and darkness, now there was light, laughter, and an endless promise love always finds a way even in the desert. Years passed, drifting like wind over the plains of Cedar Springs. From that small schoolhouse by the creek, the land itself transformed. Young willows grew along the banks. Children's laughter echoed each morning, mixing with hoofbeats, chimes, and the scent of wild grass. On a calm afternoon, Margaret Morrison sat by the window telling her students a story about a lost girl and a cowboy who found each other in a storm of sand. Her voice was soft, each word like sunlight falling gently upon the room. The children listened wide-eyed until one asked, "Miss, did they really live happily ever after?" Margaret smiled, her eyes drifting toward the hill beyond the ranch. "Yes," she said, "because they learned that even in the driest desert, love can grow." Outside, the wind brushed over the grasslands, carrying the scent of dust and life. Colt Morrison sat on the fence, hat tipped low, eyes glowing beneath the brim, the look of a man who had walked through storms and found peace. At his feet, a boy of 6 played with a newborn foal. The child's laughter rang bright as he touched the horse's mane like it was something sacred. Colt smiled, a rare smile full of love. When the bell rang, Margaret stepped out, dusting chalk from her dress. The honeyed light of late day poured through the curtains, bathing her in gold. Colt approached, his gaze as soft as the first day he'd seen her fall in the desert long ago. "The children still love the old stories," he said. She nodded. "Because they remind us every beginning comes from the unexpected. Like you and me, like you and me," she answered, smiling. Colt looked at the schoolhouse, its walls now covered in climbing flowers. "Never thought Cedar Springs would live to see this day." "It's not Cedar Springs that lived," she said gently. "It's us who learned to live with it." He smiled, the calm smile of a man who had walked through wilderness and found home. Their little boy laughed in the distance, the sound blending with the wind. Margaret gazed at the horizon, the sunset blazing orange and crimson behind the mountains. Sometimes she whispered, "The harshest lands grow the gentlest hearts." Colt said nothing, only tightened his hand around hers. They stood together, the man of earth and wind, the woman of light and faith, listening to the murmur of the stream, the birds and the laughter of their son running toward them. "Daddy, will you teach me to ride tomorrow?" Colt chuckled, lifting the boy onto his shoulders. "Tomorrow at sunrise we'll ride together." Margaret watched them, her smile soft, her tears shining in the fading light. A small family, a once barren land, and a love that had found its way home, all blending into the final song of the day. As the sun sank fully and the sky turned violet, the stars unfolded just like that night long ago when they had confessed by the campfire. Margaret looked up. Under the western sky, everything began. Colt smiled. And under this same sky, everything will last. The wind swept across the fields, carrying the whisper of their love alive through wind dust and time. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 and subscribe for more Wild West tales where love meets dust and destiny. Wild West US. Where cinematic love stories still burn beneath the western sun. Where strong cowboys love with quiet hearts. Where gentle women heal the wild. Between wind and sand, between solitude and hope, love always finds a way.